To say that Sony has not just dipped their toes in the water, but has jumped into the deep end would be a gross understatement. But that's exactly what they did with their July 1st announcement that as of 2028, Sony PlayStation would be ending physical disc production and pushing all sales through their digital storefront. How Sony chose to make that announcement was through a blog post and a tweet, which I think speaks volumes about how they view their fan base. But with Sony, it's not about the fans, as what they cater to, at least these days, is their investors. And more on that in just a bit. Now, what was truly shocking and insane was just how widespread this post has become, reaching levels of virality that are simply immeasurable. As of the publication of this video, that tweet alone has now been viewed over 184 million times. It has over 108,000 comments, and it was also hit by community notes left, right, and center. In fact, the backlash for that announcement was so severe that PlayStation just went comms dark for an entire week after posting that announcement. And as we later learned, Sony knew that announcement would be wildly unpopular, so they issued the strictest ever social media guidelines Sony employees have ever seen. So again, Sony knew this would be a PR nightmare, but they decided to surge ahead nonetheless. With the RAM-pocalypse currently ongoing and expected to extend well into 2028, and many projecting gaming consoles like the PlayStation 6 to reach into the $1,000 range, if not more, seeing Sony make controversial after controversial move that are definitely anti-consumer really feels like that they're barreling headlong into their own Xbox One or Nintendo Wii moment. Now, we all remember Xbox rolling out their infamous used games policy with things like fee gating the pre-owned market, an always online requirement with 24-hour check-ins, and essentially overnight, they tried to kill the traditional sharing of games, a move that was famously pounced on and mocked by, of all places, Sony with this epic dunk of an instructional video.
This is how you share your games on PS4.
Thanks.
Now, after that backlash, Xbox did eventually backtrack on those wildly unpopular changes, but that's a move to this day that Xbox has still not recovered from, some 12 years later. But, who knows? With Asha Sharma now at the helm and Sony making enough stupid decisions to last a lifetime, maybe this is their moment. Maybe this is just the opening Xbox needs to get back on even footing. We'll see, as only time will tell. In fact, it feels like the entire past month has been one giant fumble and stumble after another from the games industry. Now, outside of Sony's no physical disc announcement, we also saw former head of the PlayStation Store, Gordon Thornton, come out and try to push the game's pricing issues over onto their publishers, saying it was them and not Sony that controlled the prices. And that's why they were so high, only to see his statements go up in flames when a 2019 Sony lawsuit was cited where Sony actually admitted to requiring their publishers who sell digital games on the PlayStation Store to relinquish full control over the retail price over to Sony. More recently, and while all of the killing of physical media backlash was ramping up, we also saw Sony pull out a master stroke of PR genius when they ran a promo for, of all things, their LX3 vinyl record turntable. Just listen to this splash. Rediscover the warmth, detail, and ritual of vinyl with the LX3 turntable. Drop the needle, press play, and enjoy music the way it was meant to be heard. Now, apparently, vinyl is worth saving, but, physical games, which is far more mainstream, is not. Of course, other games publishers were sitting back anxiously waiting for the Sony announcement to drop, as Ubisoft was one of the first to chime in with their support for killing physical media and discs, going on to say, PlayStation killing discs has upsides. We think it will not disturb too much the industry. Now, you may not remember this, but a few years ago, it was also a Ubisoft exec who famously said, gamers need to get comfortable with not owning your games. And, who can forget Ubisoft's brilliant NFT blockchain courts program for Ghost Recon Breakpoint, where the head of that program belittled gamers, telling them that they had no idea how good NFTs would be for the games industry, while never actually providing any hard evidence that it would be good for the games industry. And, you know, this is kind of overall what we've come to expect from modern Ubisoft. More recently, Grand Theft Auto 6, the most anticipated games release of all time, made headlines when they announced that their physical edition would not include a disc. And instead, you know, it would just be a code in the box, which instantly drew a ton of backlash from the entire games community. Strauss Zelnick, Take-Two's CEO, also just made some current headlines with this PC Gamer article expecting the games industry to be in commercial streaming mode within 3 years, which is great news if you hate owning things. But for all the conveniences Zelnick sees in this possibility, and of course profits, he also failed to recognize that in many regions of the world, high-speed internet is not yet available. So for those gamers, physical games and sharing are how they engage with their passions for gaming. Who knows? Maybe all those countries and regions around the world don't matter on these companies' financials and are only a blip on their quarterly statements, which, by the way, is still a matter that PlayStation has yet to address, as once their all-digital storefront run through the PlayStation Store goes live, 121 countries around the world will be excluded from that store as they aren't able to create PSN accounts, which makes, well, let's just say the whole thing is woefully underplanned and not supported. As even recently we saw both the Xbox and PlayStation networks go down for long periods of time, again proving these companies are not yet ready for an all-digital future. They say they are, but they are not. Even now, Sony claims they're trying to find a win-win situation with US retailers, suggesting they could still sell codes in a box. Yeah, again, you can't make this stuff up. So instead of a physical game disc or, say, a collector's edition with a steel case, map, a compendium, and the other goodies you would get along with a disc, Sony now wants to ship a piece of plastic with a little bit of artwork on it, along with a digital code, which would still have to be activated through the PlayStation Network. So it's just another way of directing you through and keeping you tied to their ecosystem. And once they've got you captured there and you're a part of their network, they can then milk their consumers for all their data and for elevated prices for their digital products, which has led to Sony getting blitzed with lawsuits from around the world. As Kotaku recently said, quote, PlayStation is being sued in 5 different countries over anti-competitive concerns, and the end of discs isn't helping. Now, in our past Sony coverage here on the channel, I've broken down the ongoing lawsuit currently brought forward by a Dutch consumer organization to the tune of $457 million. In the past, Sony was able to point to the secondary market as evidence that they in fact did not have a monopoly over the marketplace, but since the announcement that physical disc will be gone come 2028, that effectively kills their last line of defense. So in essence, Sony has shot themselves in the foot by defeating their only defense. Now in this lawsuit, the argument is that Sony was making 30% markups on every game sold through the PlayStation Store, known as the Sony tax, and when gamers had a secondary source, they could actually find better and more competitive prices outside of that network. But now, with their push to an all-digital future handled exclusively by the PlayStation Store, it has essentially created a non-competitive marketplace. However, when it comes to all these countries, these lawsuits, and everything that's being done by these consumer advocate groups, the quote of the year has to go to Mexican lawmakers, who actually said, "You pay the price of an owner, they give you the rights of a renter." Speaking directly to Sony's policies towards this all-digital future, where the screens actually say, "Buy now," but in reality, what you are buying is not a product, it's a license, and a revocable license at that, which companies like Sony can disable anytime they want. Now, we've also seen a current California lawsuit alleging that Sony has used that verbiage, "buy now," in a truly misleading way, going on to say that terms like "buy now" and "confirm purchase" are there to give buyers confidence in that purchase, while the legal reality sits buried in the terms of service that nobody reads. As much as gamers push and community notes Sony, and we'll see if that impacts the PlayStation 6 launch and so on into 2027 and 2028, in reality it's with these lawsuits that we, the consumers, the gamers, stand the best chance of stonewalling these companies from taking away all consumer rights to games ownership and the ability to access fair and competitive prices through the outside retailer and secondhand market. Because with the most recent news we've seen coming out of Sony, they've gone and doubled, even tripled down on their path forward. And based on them finally responding to that player backlash, it's clear they don't give a shit about gamers. According to 𝐓𝐡𝐻𝐿.com, they summed up a recent Sony investors call where CFO 𝐓𝐡𝐻𝐿 addressed investors something like this. Sony and PlayStation break their silence on the backlash over the end of physical games, but deliver bad news. The company won't change course despite fan criticism. Sony CFO 𝐓𝐡𝐻𝐿 explains why the company has no plans to reverse its all-digital strategy. What's interesting here about 𝐻𝐿's statements is the where and to who that statement was made. Instead of addressing the millions upon millions of gamers around the world, Sony waited it out to speak to the crowd that truly matters to them, their investors. You see, 𝐻𝐿 went on to say, quote, "The biggest being that the digitalization of content overall has been progressing. That's the big factor. It's not just for PlayStation, but for all kinds of contents. Digitalization is progressing. When we think about the future, we put in a lot of thought and time. We cautiously considered this. We came to this conclusion. We're going to cautiously move this forward." So for all the thought and factors facing their decision, along with the word cautiously, which she uses a few times here in the statement, Sony is still moving forward, doubling down on their bet that gamers will stick with them once discs are gone in 2028 and $1,000 plus consoles are the reality. We'll see, but I'm leaning towards this being a much bigger disaster than even Sony is anticipating. 𝐻𝐿 went on to say that at this point in time, they're not seeing any impact on their business because for the most part, content sales are already digitized. And yeah, this is an argument you see splashed, shared, and repeated around through pundits and games media everywhere. The message is physical discs are already dead, which I think is disingenuous. Now, do digital sales outweigh physical? Yes. But when you're a publisher only offering a digital version of your game, those overall sales figures are going to, of course, skew heavily towards digital copies sold, because when you offer 100% one version and 0% the other, those numbers are, of course, again, going to favor digital. You could also throw into the mix all the online microtransactions, battle passes, demo and free game downloads, and the rest of it, which is, of course, lumped into digital, making those trends and percentages that you keep seeing repeated in games media headlines appear as the inevitable. But in reality, they're not the full picture. Lost in the CFO's statements were the actual financials that Sony just posted, which I think explains why they're so dismissive of gamers and consumers around the world, as well as the cries for physical media. You see, overall, the company's profits were up 8%, while their gaming divisions saw operating income up by 37%. So, of course, when you look at that, despite the ongoing player-led initiatives and backlash, Sony's not going to lift a finger and they're not going to change course. I mean, they just made a 37% increase in their net operating income. Now, this is for last quarter before they drop the physical media bombshell, so we'll see how they fare going later into 2026 and again into 2027. But if anything, with the recent news coming to us from Tech Radar, Sony has just gone and tripled down on their route to an all-digital future, as now Sony is putting important notice labels on current PS5 consoles for sale, warning buyers that disc production will end come 2028. So even if you were to buy a PS5 now with a disc drive, which by the way on Amazon are going for the upper $500 to close to $700 USD for a renewed version, so again, this is not new, or you can just buy it direct through PlayStation for $649 USD, you're still looking at a future where in a little over a year, the disc drive on your expensive console will not be looking at any new releases on disc for you to play. Also, As gamers are pushed to an only digital future, they're going to find that today's games have very large and bloated file sizes, forcing them to either delete older games to free up that space, or to push them to buy more storage. And with the current RAM-pocalypse, those storage prices are simply insane. But this last bit of recent breaking news shows what a state Sony truly is in, as according to Push Square, Sony is now looking to bring more ads to PlayStation. That's right, you heard it correct, more ads on your PlayStation. So it isn't enough that console prices are already insane and will reach epic levels once the PlayStation 6 is launched. It isn't enough that Sony is killing the retail and secondhand market along with physical media, all in the name of forcing everyone to their single PlayStation store where they can hit buyers with full price purchases and no ownership rights. Now, it looks like Sony is also looking for ways to incorporate ads from non-endemic brands into its console as they look for ways to maximize profits. So apparently, Sony looked at that operating income spike of 37% and said, we want more. Sony tried these outside ads on the PlayStation 3 way back in 2008, but they were quickly pulled due to negative reactions from PlayStation owners. However, now, again, according to Push Square, the emphasis they saw on a new PlayStation job listing makes very specific mention of non-endemic brands, meaning the scope extends well beyond just promoting upcoming games like GTA 6 and COD Modern Warfare 4, and is instead looking at non-gaming products like, say, for instance, Coca-Cola and McDonald's. But again, Sony, with their competitor Xbox stumbling around, has been presented a golden ticket to take over once and for all the entire gaming console market, and instead they seem to be looking at the checklist of success and are choosing to make every boneheaded anti-consumer choice known to mankind. All in all, though, with the doubling down from Sony's CFO, the possibility of outside ads showing up on console home screens in 2026, I think it shows that Sony is wanting every dollar and cent they can milk out of their player base. And although the financials don't currently show any downwards trends, this is going to be an interesting topic to watch, especially as we make it into 2027 and the inevitable launch of the PlayStation 6. But here's where I turn to you and ask that you drop a comment with your thoughts and feedback about the entire Sony situation. If you found the video informative, please consider hitting subscribe and ringing the notifications bell. And before I end this one, I'd like to extend a massive thank you to all of our hardcore channel supporters. Until the next one, this is Lieutenant Buzz Lightyear, signing off.